I've been working in this media for about 10 years, and I've really learned a lot about the viewer's experience and how important that is if the art is to rise above being called eye candy. In this presentation, I'm going to provide some insights into how I manage the three-dimensional space of lenticular imaging. Now, ever since I saw lenticular images from a Cracker Jack box and on political pins, I have been fascinated by this moving image placed under a lens. But by the time I was 8 years old, my demand for Cracker Jacks outpaced the family budget. So my dad showed me how to draw stick figures in the margins of a Reader's Digest magazine to make my own animation flip books. These dancing figures have remained in my mind to this day. I would learn decades later that these were the basic concept behind the frames of a lenticular animation or a 3D image. Today, the primary use of this technology still is for trinkets and sports cards, cups and keychains and mouse pads. Small items are still printed on offset presses, but there's a growing demand for larger images now that we can image directly to the lens with UV cured pigment inks. Back in 1999, I convinced my digital atelier associates, Dorothy Krause and Karen Schmenke, that we should learn this new media. So we took a 3-day workshop and then committed to exhibit at a Seabolt seminars. Seabolt sponsored that first exhibit, and we didn't know it at the time, but it was, in fact, the very first exhibition of any large format inkjet-produced lenticular prints. And we created the entire exhibit using a Superflip software. The exhibit was a wild success. In 3 days, we sold over $19,000 worth of prints with an average price of $250 apiece. We were certain we were on the road to riches. Following that, we were commissioned by Xerox to produce 1,000 8x10 3D bears for the TED conference using a laser printer. Now, at that time, the cheapest way to get a lenticular was to spend about $10,000 to do a run, and only wanting 1,000 bears, we agreed to do this on the laser printer. However, after that experience, we decided that it was entirely too much work, so I decided to make far fewer prints on a much larger scale. At the same time, I began to use a program called Super 3D Genius, and that would create fully rounded objects for me. However, with that software came some very unexpected issues. The early reactions to these 3D objects were that they made people dizzy, they hurt their eyes, they made them sick, they couldn't focus, they simply didn't like to look at them. And I was baffled by what had happened between the first group of images and then moving to the 3D images. Normally, you're asked to think outside the box to solve a problem. But I realized I needed to think inside the box. I had to control that visual experience. And this is where creativity and keen observation of what was happening became important. I'm going to show a number of examples that will illustrate how I control what's in that box or visual field of my 3D work. Primary items to consider are controlling the center of interest, the color temperature of the objects, whether they're animated or blinking. The installation site for the work is very, very important. The perspective used within the image, color values, lighting, shadowing, and framing is very, very important. The viewer's vision enters the picture. Today, many people are going to contact lenses that have monovision, where they're seeing one eye up close and the other at a distance. I call these people depth perception challenged. They can't really see and appreciate these images. The lenticular lens, whether it's a 15-line or a 100-line lens, makes a big difference on how it's viewed. The size and the width of the art is, I realize now, very important. 4 feet wide is not better than 2 feet wide. First, I'm going to cover some points to consider when creating site-specific installations. The most common way to deal with 3D space is to cut out objects and stack them in front of a background. In this image that I did for Mac Store, I felt that there was not enough stuff in the image when I picked it apart. So I added animation layers, and this was important because it's viewed in a long hallway, and while you're walking down the hall, it's the animation that becomes important. Now this is installed at the St. Regis Hotel in Aspen, Colorado. To stay within the budget, I designed 3 panels that you see on the left. I repeated these panels until I covered the whole semicircle, and notice that each panel is only 24 inches wide. The panels are recessed 4 inches in the wall space. By designing the installation with a foot between the panels, the installation appears to be one large tank. This spacing keeps the frame reset from being seen because the viewer has already walked into the next frame. When you stand in the center of any one panel, there is enough image when you look left or right that you feel as though you're looking at a contiguous scene. The reflections and aspen leaves live in the 4-inch recess and invite the viewer to touch. The trout that are at the lens level greet the viewer very close to where their eyes are and at hand level. At the top in the background, it is less saturated in color, which makes the lighting appear as though it's coming from above in the image. This is another 8 by 12 foot installation at the end of a 100-foot hallway between 2 buildings at Avaya. At a distance, it had to read as a very large graphic. It is only when you get to be 10 feet away that you see the 3D, and only when you turn down the hall to turn right that you begin to see those animations. This site-specific installation is for a stockbroker's office. I cut up dollar bills into confetti, made several scans, and placed them on different depths. When walking straight at this artwork, the arrows at the bottom point up and are green. As you step to the side, they turn down and turn red, reflecting the stock market up and down. This past year, I completed a 6 by 16 foot mural for the Platte Valley Medical Center in Colorado. To start this commission, I visited the construction site to work with the contractor and discuss the light box construction. Lighting for lenticular art is quite different than from backlighting advertising. Here I used Sylvania Octocron 950 bulbs in a 4-inch deep recessed box that was painted white. The lights are equivalent to a 5,000 Kelvin daylight. And notice that the lights are centered so that the art has a little bit of a vignette on all sides. I use about 1/4 of the illumination that might be used on an advertising poster. What I'm after is a soft glow that removes reflection from the front of the lens. Regular backlit inkjet media has to be lit to be seen properly. With my artwork, I need to have it equally seen with the lights on or off. So I came up with a system of printing my own blue filters that I place between the art and the lens and the diffuser. This allows me to use regular inkjet media that might otherwise have a yellow cast when the lights are turned off, or when it's lit from behind, rather. Now, these people also wanted a bald eagle, so I borrowed one from the Natural History Museum so I could photograph it in 3D. And trust me, this is distracted driving. The eye of the eagle is the pivot point, which causes the bird's head to turn and follow the viewer as they walk past the artwork. The art uses bits and pieces from nearly 300 photographs. The Photoshop file for the 3-panel section was 9.3 gigabytes. To be able to interlace these at 600 dpi, I had to cut each panel in half horizontally and then reassemble it into a 4 gigabyte file that was printed on an inkjet printer. Each half panel took 12 hours to interlace, so there's a week's worth of interlacing in this. Now, often overlooked is designing from the top of this 3D box. In the images in the top row, you can see that I've used the ceiling to have the swimmer hanging from the top and also reflections of the fish. These were installed in the same hospital in the children's area, in the emergency room area. But they hung on the frames and ripped them off the walls. So they had to rebuild the wall and then bolt the work into the studs. I had used the 3D 15-line lens from Microlens, which is very immersive. That turtle stands about a foot in front of the lens, so that's why they were so fascinating. All of these multiple interlace sets were imported back into Photoshop so layer effects could be used after I interlace them. I don't think there's any interlacing software that will use all the interlaced layer effects that we can have in Photoshop. Now here, this piece is in the lobby. The blue recedes in space, and the whiter light area of the water at the top comes forward. There's a play between the solid and the transparent objects, and that's something I learned between shifting software, was that the transparent objects really define the space and make it much more believable. The vertical layers in this create layers of reflections and really utilize that vertical space. Hanging the work at eye level is critical to proper viewing. This means that an 8-foot-tall lenticular is really not all that great to be looking at, because the image is too far away. Ambient room light is the very best for viewing. Halogen spotlights or floodlights make it impossible to see the artwork properly, and this probably is the biggest obstacle to displaying this work. In the exhibit here, it is light challenged, to say the least.